East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Welcome to East Idaho Newsmakers. Today we are discussing an interesting topic with Pastor Tim Rupp. He is the pastor of River of Life Church, and just yesterday at Water Springs Church, he was part of a church security seminar where several congregations, several pastors of local churches came together to discuss security and safety at church. Now, first of all, Pastor Rupp, thank you for coming in today to talk with us. Let me read a little bit about you for those people that aren't familiar with you. Tim Rupp's law enforcement career spans 4 decades. His father was both a career military man and a pastor, so it was natural for Tim to enlist in the Air Force after graduating high school in 1979. He served 4 years of active duty as an Air Force law enforcement specialist. After his enlistment, Tim joined the San Antonio Police Department and gave 24 years of dedicated service before retiring in 2007. He worked as a patrol officer, homicide detective, patrol sergeant, sex crime sergeant, police academy supervisor, and internal affairs sergeant-investigator. Tim served and certified as a police firearms instructor and supervised police firearms and tactics for years. He continues to serve with the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office here in Idaho Falls as a reserve deputy. Now, before retiring from the police department in Texas, Tim was called to pastor Elm Creek Baptist Church just outside of San Antonio. After retiring, he moved here to Idaho Falls and became senior pastor, he currently is the senior pastor of River of Life Church and Cop Church, Idaho Falls. He also instructs for the College of Eastern Idaho, and he has written a book, Pistol in the Pulpit. Tim is married to Sherry. They have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. There's a little bit about the pastor, but what's the reason why I wanted to have you come in here today is to talk about pistols at the pulpit. You were saying before we started rolling, you knew the pastor quite well. You know him of the church where that tragic shooting happened last year.
Yes, church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Pastor Frank Pomeroy. Pastor Frank and I go back 20 plus years. We served together at a church, Lavernia, in Lavernia, First Baptist Church of Lavernia, where we were both members of that church, and we later on, both of us became pastors. And so I've known Frank for 20 plus years. And you asked me before we started how he's doing, and I'd like to report that he is really doing well. The church is doing well. They're recovering well. The congregation that he pastors there, he said there's really a good spirit in the people, and they're coming back, and it was devastating for him to go through that. I talked to him last week, and he said the 26 people that were murdered were all key people, including his 14-year-old daughter. But they were all key people in leadership at the church there, and he lost them all. But yet the Lord is blessed, and the church is coming back strong.
He was gone that day, right?
Yes, he was. I asked Frank because I was concerned about church security and safety procedures and stuff, and I wanted to give him time to think about things, to go through a little bit of the healing process. But I asked Frank, I said, Frank, if there's something you would have done differently, what would you have done? And he said, Tim, we had an armed team in place. However, it just happened that day that all 4 people of their armed team were not at church. And then he told me, he said, you know what, we got sucked into complacency. He said, we had a team, but it really wasn't, they didn't really train properly. They just had a team to say they had a team. And that's one thing that I addressed in my book that I wrote a couple years ago, that training needs to be there. You need not just to have a team, but there needs to be training. And it doesn't have to be heavy, intensive training, you think for hours and hours like a SWAT team would or something. But just a little bit of training goes a long way.
You have a really fascinating, interesting background, many, many years in law enforcement. At what point in your law enforcement career did you feel called to the work? Or was it something that you've always been a man of faith and thought that this is the route you wanted to go?
Well, I've always been a man of faith, but it's a route I really never wanted to go. I grew up, my dad retired from the Air Force, and he went into pastoring. He was called to be a pastor when he was in his early 40s. And so when I was in my teens, I became a preacher's kid, if you will. And I never had a desire to be a pastor. It actually scared me. I didn't want to do that. All I wanted to be growing up my whole life was to be a policeman. That's all I wanted. I love police work, and I was able to get on the San Antonio Police Department. When I graduated from high school, you can't be a policeman when you're 18, but you can join the Air Force and be a security policeman. So I did that. And after my enlistment was up, after 4 years, I joined the San Antonio Police Department. And I just absolutely loved the career. And I really enjoyed the job. But about 15, 16, 17 years into it, the Lord started tugging at me and said, you know what, I've got something different for you to do. And although I continued to enjoy the job of policing, I felt called to be a pastor. And so through a series of events, I became a bivocational pastor outside of San Antonio, in Lavernia, Texas there, just outside of Lavernia actually. And so I pastored there for a few years. And after about 5 years into it, we realized that the Lord was calling me into full-time ministry. And in 2007, I retired and came up here to Idaho Falls and started pastoring here, and I've been pastoring here now for over 10 years now.
At what point did you decide, I think I need to write a book about security, about pistols at the pulpit?
Well, what really did it for me, being in policing my whole life and seeing the changes that's taken place since the 1999 Columbine shooting and the different shootings, what really did it for me was the Sandy Hook shooting. When the Sandy Hook shooting took place in December, I think it was 2012 or 2013, I decided that point on, I said, you know what, after I retired from policing, I carried my pistol occasionally with me, but I really didn't do it that much. But I decided I'm going to start carrying my pistol. And I talked to the elders of my church. I said, gentlemen, do you think that we should have an armed safety response team trained at the church to protect our congregation? And they said, yes, Pastor, and we think you should train them because you have the background experience. At that point, I started looking. I went on Amazon, I went on different places looking for some kind of resource that a pastor could use to teach them how to train a team, how to form a team. I couldn't find anything. I went to a seminar put on by Dave Grossman and Carl Chin. Carl Chin, if you recall, was the security officer, the security team at New Life, a church in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where there was a shooting there in 2007. He was involved in that shooting, and he had written a book. And so I went to that seminar, but I still didn't get exactly what I wanted. And so I thought about it, prayed about it, and I thought, well, I've got the policing background and I have the pastoring background. And so I felt the Lord laid it upon my heart to write a book, to get that resource out there. So I did some research. I did extensive research on active shooters in churches and places in publics and so forth. And I wrote the book called Pistol in the Pulpit.
So there might be people that say, well, guns don't belong in church, that look at guns as not being peaceful or...
Right, and you know, and before writing this book, I interviewed several people of faith, several pastors and ministers, both in my denomination and different denominations, different churches, different religious faiths. And here's what I found out, that the three big things that they're concerned about is, where do I stand biblically, where do I stand legally, and where do I stand with liability? And so I address all of them issues. And for Christians or people of faith, one of the biggest issues is biblically. Where do I stand with God, taking guns in church? I went to the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, and in chapter 2 of my book, I outline where the Lord has called us to self-defense. And I went through several passages in the Bible and showed how the Lord wants us to have a balanced approach. People say, well, the biggest thing, church people say, well, why don't you just trust God? And what I do is I ask them, do you still lock your doors? Well, yeah, I lock my doors. Do you wear seatbelts? And people do these things as a precaution. Not that they don't trust God, but God has also given us intellect. and He's given us resources so we can protect ourselves. And so I address the issue from a biblical standpoint, that in fact the Bible supports defending ourselves. In fact, I believe the Bible commands me as a husband and a father to protect my family. I have a mandate to protect my family. If a bad guy came into my house, broke into my front door, brandishing a gun, I am obligated to protect my family. What is the difference if I'm at church and that same guy comes into the church brandishing a gun? I still have an obligation, a biblical obligation, to protect my family. And so what's the best way to do that? And the best way to do that is to prepare. Years ago, before all the fire drills and the fire regulations and codes, we had a problem in America with people being killed in fires. But over the past few years, name one fire in a public school where children were killed. You can't name one. Why? Because we prepared. It's not because we don't have fire anymore, but we've prepared. Children are trained. If you go to any public school and pull a fire alarm, what are the children going to do? They're going to respond as they were trained. They're going to put down their books, get up, get in line, and walk out and be safe from a fire. Why don't we train the same way for an active shooter, or better yet, the better term is an active killer, because that's what they're coming to do. And since Columbine in 1999, things have changed in America. I was in policing then. I'd been in policing for years at that time, for 20 years at that time. Since 1979, I've been in policing. And as police officers, when we were trained to respond as first responders to a man with a gun in a barricaded situation, that type of things, our training was to respond, secure the perimeter, call out the SWAT team and the negotiators, and wait it out. On the rare occasions where we were called to go in, then we would methodically and slowly make a plan and go in. After Columbine, things have changed, because in the Columbine school, the police did exactly what they were trained to do. They responded, they set up a perimeter, they called in the SWAT team, and they waited. Now, a SWAT team, people think they're going to respond immediately. Sometimes it takes several minutes or even hours for a SWAT team to get mobilized and to respond. In the meantime, what was happening in Columbine, where the police were outside securing, the bad guys were inside killing their victims. And so Columbine changed the whole thing, because these active shooters or these active killers are no longer coming to as criminals to steal or to take somebody hostage and demand a ransom. They are coming to kill. That's their only purpose, is to kill, and they get there and they kill as many people as they can. And our studies have shown that, I think, if I remember correctly, 49% of those killers end up committing suicide. And the reason why they do that is because they've ran out of victims and they kill themselves. So they need to be stopped.
So there's going to be people that say, well, I don't want to live in an America where you have to have an armed guard at every school. Is that just a reality at this point in age?
That's a reality. When I was in school, there was no such thing as police officers in schools. We didn't have it. Now it's common to have police officers in school. When I was growing up, all the doors were to be open. We were concerned about pedophiles. And so we unlock the doors in the schools and make sure people can come in and out so somebody wouldn't be alone with the child. We're putting the lock back on the doors so the schools can go into lockdown now. And what these killers are doing, they're moving from targets that are becoming harder as schools are becoming harder to penetrate. They have policemen on duty there. They've made the schools harder to penetrate. They're moving to a softer target. A softer target is a church. And they're doing things, not only is a church a softer target, there's a lot of people that gather in churches every Saturday or Sunday, whatever faith you're in, or other days of the week. But because of the Christian idea, or the people of faith, is they're welcoming and opening, and they're unexpecting people to come. And so to somebody who says, well, I don't want to live in a society where there's armed guards all around, I don't either. But the fact of the matter is, you can prepare a church. If your church chooses to have an armed response team, that's the decision the individual church needs to make. But I believe every church needs to make a decision to have a response, some kind of response. If your church decides we're not going to go with an armed response, okay, what kind of response are you going to have? Because if you're not prepared, what you're going to do is when a guy comes in with a gun, you're going to sit there and you're going to be targets for him. And that's what it's going to be. But if you respond in some manner to that aggression, he can be stopped. You remember the shooting in the community college in Washington. The bad guy went in with a gun. The first person he took out was the teacher. That's usually what they do. They take out the authority figure. So in a church, they'll probably go in and take out the pastor, the priest, the bishop, whoever's up front leading, and then they'll start with their victims. Well, in that situation, the bad guy went into the classroom, took out the teacher, started shooting, stopped and started reloading and talking to the students. And they just submitted to him. But there was one guy in the back, Chris Mitz, that he realized this guy's not going to stop until someone stops him. And so he ran from the back of the classroom, took 7 hits, and was able to take down the gunman. And because of Mr. Mitz doing that, he saved who knows how many people. But the thing is, he responded. So even if a church decides we're not going to have an armed team here, but we are going to respond. We're not going to stop and submit and become victims. And so what I would recommend is for a church to develop a plan. First of all, you want to identify suspicious people before they even get into the sanctuary area. If you can identify them, stop them from coming in somehow. If they come in and they start shooting, for the congregation to have some kind of a response to protect themselves from him, whether it's throwing objects at him. Most people have cell phones nowadays. Throw your cell phone at him. I believe that some people should rush him physically. Well, somebody may get hurt. He's coming there to kill people. And so you need to stop the killing. That's the important thing to do.
All right, we're going to take a 15-second break. More with the pastor when we come back.
At the Bank of Commerce, we understand the hard work, determination, and sacrifice it takes to run a successful business. That's why we're here every step of the way to help make your dreams come true. The Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
Welcome back. Today we are talking with Pastor Tim Rupp. He is the pastor of the River of Life Church in Idaho Falls, also the author of the book, Pistol in the Pulpit, a former law enforcement officer with a distinguished career. You were talking before the break about how churches need to have a plan. Again, some may argue that, well, if you allow everyone to bring their guns at church and a shooter comes in, it's going to be, like the Wild West, everybody's shooting which way.
That's the exact thing. We're in Idaho, so people are allowed to bring their guns into a place. If the church has a policy against that, then that's going to be up for the people to follow that policy. But I'll tell you a little secret I found out. I've talked to a lot of people in Idaho Falls, and their church has a policy of no guns, and they tell me, Pastor Tim, I carry my gun anyways. So
this morning.
You have people that's carrying the gun. So that's not the answer. And the answer isn't, okay, we're going to allow guns here, so bring them. There needs to be some training. And what we've done at our church is we've identified some guys. First of all, we're going to identify who we want to be on that team. And how you qualify people isn't because, well, so-and-so has a concealed carry, so he's trained. Or so-and-so is a good hunter, or so-and-so knows a lot about guns, so we'll get them guys on. What you want to go first is with character. You want to have somebody that you're willing to say, I want that person defending me with a gun, and you're good with that. And so they need to be vetted by character. And then there needs to be some training that goes on. And when I started training our own group, what I found out is this. I've been through a lot of training as a policeman to respond to active shooters. And we get the call and we respond, and on the way there, we're thinking about a plan in our mind, planning what we're going to do, and we get there and we enter. And we are in search of the bad guy, and we aggress the bad guy. In a church situation, the first thing I realize is we're right now in the middle of it. 1 minute you're singing a song or you're listening to the preacher, the next second a guy is behind you with a gun. You have to respond. You can't take time to think and what I'm going to do, because as soon as he walks in, he starts shooting, or he's shooting before he's coming in. So the response needs to be immediate and it needs to be effective. The shooting has got to stop. In some of my training, people say, well, are we to kill people? No, we never train to kill people. Police do not train to kill people. You train to stop them. Whatever it is that they're doing, if they come in there with a gun and are shooting people or intent on shooting people, you need to stop them from doing that. And it very well may cost them their life. But that's something that needs to be brought up. And even before you start tactical training, how to respond, anybody who carries a gun, concealed carry, or if you just have one in your own home for self-defense, you need to address the question, am I willing to pull the trigger? Am I willing to take the life of another human being? And if you can honestly answer that question, say, no, I'm not willing to do that, then you really have no business having a gun for personal defense. Because a gun for personal defense is not used, it should not be used as a threat. If you're going to use it, you have to be willing to use it. That doesn't mean you have to use it each time, but you have to be willing to do so.
And there's people that are like, I don't want to have a gun. I don't care if other people have them, but I don't really want to have one. But they go to church, they worship, they go to school. Today it's Sunday when this airs. There will be people going to church in an hour. Heaven forbid they're sitting in their pew and a gunman does come in. They don't have a gun on them. You mentioned throwing a cell phone. I mean, is there anything else you could do in that split second? Because I would imagine most people run. Run, get out of here, protect my kids. What should we do in that situation?
Well, let me tell you something. Most people don't run. Most people
freeze.
They freeze because they are overwhelmed with what's going on. They stop to think, there's somebody in here, he's got a gun. He's in church. He's not supposed to be in here with a gun in church.
Trying to process.
And they're processing that. And in the meantime, he's shooting and killing people. And so so this goes back to what the church is going to do. How is the church going to respond? In our church, we have a couple teams. We have an unarmed team that addresses individuals that are just coming in, causing a disturbance. And we have an armed team. If a man walks in with a gun, somebody comes in with a gun, a deadly weapon, the armed team goes into action. They will stand up and address the situation. Our congregation is taught anybody that's not on the team to get down, so they're not in the way of gunfire. Because we don't want everybody standing up and aggressing him. Before we had the team in place, what we practiced and what we drilled was to get up, and for the men were to get hymnals, Bibles, whatever it is, and throw it at him and aggress the gunman and take him down. Women were to get the children and go down, so they're protected. So there's an immediate response.
Get down.
To get down, and to get down. Now, you want to, if you can create distance, that's the best thing to do. Churches are different, though. If you hear a shooting out, if you have a large campus at your church and you hear shooting somewhere, then yes, they need to exit from away from the gunfire to another place. The best thing to do is to create distance, create space, stop the gunman from getting in. But if he's there and he's in the middle of it and you're unable to run, then you need to hide and let those who are trained to address the situation.
It's obviously a concern, not just among you and your congregation, but the fact that Water Springs Church held this weekend a seminar for all sorts of churches to come together and listen to you. And I know there's people watching that think about this. It's interesting that, I don't know if 10, 15 years ago you would go to a church or the mall or wherever and think about what happens if a shooter comes in. But I find myself even at restaurants, sitting down, maybe because we cover it so much on the news, thinking, what exit would I go out, or what if someone came in here? What are just some generic tips as we close out here that you have for people, like I said, that maybe don't want to have a gun, they don't want to have a gun in the house, they have children, What can they do to keep themselves safe?
That's the best thing to do, Eric, to keep yourself safe, is to be aware. Dave Grossman talks about, and I put it in my book, in Pistol in the Pulpit, about the 4 areas of being aware. And one is being in condition white. And condition white is being oblivious to everything that's going on. And most Americans live in condition white. They are oblivious to what's going on. We see it all the time when they're driving, they're on the phone, they're getting in wrecks, they're walking into things. They're oblivious to what's going on. But what you said about going into a restaurant and looking around and being aware and say, if something happened, this is what I'm going to do. And just mentally going through that so you know exactly, okay, boy, someone did come in, and you're already heading for an exit that you've already identified. Something as simple as that is very important. So one is to be around, where can I exit to, or where can I hide if I can't. Also, be aware of people. Look at people. If it's July, in the middle of July, and it's warm outside, and some guy's walking in with an overcoat, and he's got his hands, that's a clue. Pay attention to that. And so we need to look around for things that are abnormal. We know what's normal, look for what's abnormal. And when you start looking for the abnormal, then you can get yourself and your family away from a potential threat.
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Tim Rupp. Again, the name of the book, Pistol in the Pulpit, A Biblical and Tactical Response to Active Shooters in the House of Worship. The seminar was held this weekend at the Water Springs Church. The Strong Blue Line is your website.
Yes.
You can get more information on his website, The Strong Blue Line. I imagine you can purchase the book there as well. There's a link. Thanks for coming in. Thank you for watching. Have a good week.
East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.